Okay, we're going to begin on chapter 5 of your text, which is alimony, spousal support, and maintenance. So, this is your week 6 lecture. So, alimony, spousal support, and maintenance is kind of an area of domestic relations law where we have to learn a little bit of history. Right? Lots of people will use the word alimony interchangeably with spousal support. They really couldn't be more different. So, alimony, historically, was part of the law where a husband had to support his ex-wife and children even though the marriage was terminated. So, wow, that's a lot to unpack. There's an obligation in traditional marriage that was recognized in the law that it is the husband's job to be the provider for the family. Period. Does that mean that wives did not work? Absolutely not. They did. Women have always worked. But they also had the primary responsibility of raising children, which, by the way, is a full-time job. And so, where a lot of women worked a part-time job or a full-time job and raised children, or they worked and maybe their mother and grandma would help out with the children, that was always considered, the work of a woman was always considered secondary income to the support of the family, and it was the woman, the wife's job to run the household and raise the children. Okay? Now, that might sound really antiquated to you. Boy, times have really changed. Have they really? I don't really think so. If you think about it, it is still, society as a whole views women as the primary parent that raises children. Don't we hear about single moms all the time? Okay, where are the single dads? I don't hear about them in the news all the time. Do you? Excuse me, I'm still fighting this thing. Sorry, bear with me. So, society hasn't changed as much as what we think it has. And there still is a recognition, primarily among people who have children, that it's a lot of work to raise children properly. Right? You can stick them in daycare, you can stick them in school and after-school programs and have them raise themselves. It typically doesn't work out well. It's a lot of work to raise children. That was primarily the woman's job in a traditional marriage. And what I'm talking about is a time frame, late 1800s to 1920s, 30s, 40s. Okay? Where alimony came into play. Prior to that, really, you didn't have people getting divorced. If a husband left a wife, they basically abandoned them and you weren't going to get anything. The law went into place to recognize that, okay, if a man is going to leave his wife and children, he still has that responsibility. And we are going to terminate the marriage, but we're also going to order the man to maintain the household that he left. And, there's this phrase out there in the law, it's cheaper to keep her. I don't know if you've ever heard that before. It's a phrase we use a lot in domestic relations law. Cheaper to keep her. That goes all the way back to this idea of alimony, because what the courts would do is say, all right, husband, you want to go and commit adultery and go off with some other woman, that's fine. We'll terminate the marriage, but we're not terminating your responsibility, and you need to maintain that household in the same manner it would have been maintained had you not left the household. So it made the man pretty doggone poor. He had to work twice as hard because he was going to have 2 households to make. Sorry about that. So the courts would say, okay, we'll try this some more. Sorry, I keep getting interrupted. So when the husband would leave the family, they were kind of left in dire financial straits. And this is what you would hear a lot when I was growing up, men complaining, I gotta support 2 households. Well, yeah, you do, because marriage is a contract. There are expectations within the contract. You broke the contract, you gotta pay. This is simple contract law, people. That's all. Okay? So, if you look in your book, there's a history of alimony. It talks about ecclesiastical courts. Ecclesiastical courts were courts that were set up by churches, because remember, churches were in charge of marriage. The state had nothing to do with it. And occasionally, when people needed to terminate a marriage, a woman would go to the elders of a church or to their priest and say, look, I'm getting beaten every night, or look, he's robbing people in the neighborhood and I can't be a part of that, or look, he hasn't been around for the last 6 months, he's living with his mistress. There are so many reasons, and again, all of those reasons are what we talked about that are the grounds for divorce. The ecclesiastical courts would terminate the marriage and would impose these duties upon men. Okay? And then in the 1830s, we started to get the Married Women's Property Acts. Remember, women were not permitted to own real property. Lots of different reasons. We won't get into that right now, but men were the only ones who could own real property. And so in the 1830s, we started changing that because there was a recognition that if a husband left a wife, the wife was left penniless and had to live at the graces of the family or the community. And so we started incorporating property rights into what women could be awarded upon termination of the marriage. But still, there was this recognition that men had an obligation under this contract to support their ex-wife and, most importantly, their children if they decided to terminate the marriage. So lots of men decided, hey, it's cheaper to keep her. I don't want to have to go work 80 hours a week to support my new family and my old family. I'm tired. It also was kind of a guardrail that we set up within the courts or within society to keep people married. If you left your wife and children, you were basically going to work to death and were going to be poor, you would reconsider whether you were going to leave your wife. It kept marriages intact. Now, it didn't keep marriages intact when you had abuse, neglect, you had, alcoholism and wives being beaten. Those kinds of things didn't prevent the marriage from terminating. But for the biggie, which was adultery, if the husband was committing adultery, had a mistress, they knew, you leave your wife, there's going to be a lot of financial hardship for you. And so some people would say, well, it encouraged people to have mistresses, men to have mistresses and keep their households. Well, maybe. But it also kept the family unit intact. Good, bad, indifferent. Those were some of the unintended consequences. Okay? So that's the history of alimony. Fast forward to 1960s. oh, the decade of free love and free sex and drugs and don't get married. And women were enticed to believe in the United States that men were oppressors. And you had this women's movement, this feminist movement, Betty Friedan and, the Cinderella complex. And how do I know all this off the top of my head? Because I lived through it. I was a kid. I remember watching in horror as these very middle-class women would go down to the plaza and burn their bras. I thought, what, are you crazy? Those things cost a lot of money. But there was this movement that women should recognize their potential, and the reason they weren't recognizing their potential was because men were oppressing them. Now, when we define oppression, we don't mean any of those grounds that we have for divorce, like adultery or mental physical abuse or abandonment. We're not talking about those. We're just saying that societally, the thing was set up so men could do whatever they wanted, and women were shackled to the household. First of all, most of that wasn't true. And secondly, women were working. So I'm not really sure why women bought into this, except for the fact that we had a lot of societal change post-World War II with things like the development of washing machines and dishwashers and, things that came into the household that were pretty much, anybody could afford. Not anybody, but a lot of people could afford. And so women had a lot more time on their hands. You got a lot more time on your hands, you start getting bored. And you start reading crappy books by Marxists who tell you you're oppressed. And so women started to buy it. And you had this cultural revolution in the late 1960s and early 1970s where women looked at their husbands and said, "You're an oppressor. I'm leaving you. And I'm taking my children with me." And the husbands were like, "What are you talking about?" And you had a huge disconnect in marriages because the foundational structure of marriage was ripped apart. And so men said, all right, if you want to be happy, go leave. And women did leave. And most of them said, I don't even want your stinking money. It's tainted. And men were like, okay, I won't pay you alimony. And the cover of Time magazine, which was a big magazine at the time, had a picture of a middle-class white woman with her children. And the cover story was the face of new American poverty. Because women who had different skill sets than men, because they needed different skill sets to run a household than men did working outside the home, didn't have any skills to go into the workforce. And they didn't have anyone to watch their children. And they didn't have a place to live that they could afford. And the world started to change because legislatures catch up to what's going on in society. It's not like the legislature writes a law and then everybody moves with it. The legislatures write laws based on what's going on the ground, and they're usually 2 or 3 steps behind. So legislatures started listening to women and saying, wow, they don't have any place to live. Well, we'll build them government housing. And women don't have money to feed their children. Well, that's okay. We'll create food assistance programs. And women don't have the education that they need. That's okay. We will subsidize their education. And so you ended up in a situation where, and we can argue the politics of it all day long, whether it was purposeful or not, government started taking the place of the husband in a traditional marriage. And the husbands were like, this rocks. I don't have to pay alimony. I don't have to provide for my ex-spouse some kind of standard of living. This is fantastic. And so that guardrail of how we kept marriages together, that cheaper to keeper, went out the window. And women who didn't want to be oppressed decided they would just marry the government. And they did. And then the government said, okay, we've trained you, now get out of that workforce. We're going to have government daycare to raise your children. And then the world said, well, even if we did have alimony, we need to change those rules, because alimony was based on the fact that women had one role in the family and men had a different, and now we're mixing that up because women are going out into the workplace. So we need to change all these alimony laws. Thus was born the idea of spousal support. Spousal support is what we have today, and I would suggest to you it's not going to be around much longer, because the whole idea of spousal support is you can go into the workplace and earn money. You can go into the workplace and earn money. Therefore, I don't have any obligation to support you if the marriage terminates. We don't have the same traditional roles that we had in the marriage. You turned those on your head, wife. You're working, I'm working. Why do I have to support you anymore? You're quite capable of supporting yourself. You told me so. You told me women can do whatever men can do, and probably better. So why should I have to spend money on you when you can do it yourself? You can support yourself, support yourself. Now the children became a separate issue. Because remember, alimony was set up so that the husband had to support his wife and children. When we have spousal support, we're only talking about the spouse, and we're separating out child support. It's a completely separate calculation. And we're going to get to that in another chapter. But for the spouse, if I'm quite capable of working, why in the world would I be entitled to any spousal support? Probably not. Now, the way the court determines spousal support, and again, it goes from state to state. Every state has a statute that says, hey, court, this is what you have to consider. There are a couple of examples in the book, but what they typically will consider are things like the education of both spouses. If one spouse put another one through college to their detriment, say I was a waitress and I worked so that my husband could go through medical school and pay for medical school, well, that's a little different. If one spouse is ill, has cancer, or some kind of a long-term illness, that's something that the court will consider for spousal support. But the earning capacity is really that overarching thought. Is this person capable of earning an income to support themselves? Do they have the education? Are they healthy enough? Or have they put their earning capacity on hold to bolster their spouse's earning capacity? Those are kind of the big areas that these statutes will address. So, what you usually end up with, excuse me, if you end up with spousal support, is a situation where one spouse worked full-time, one worked part-time. The part-time person didn't have as much education as the full-time person. And so what the court will say is, hey, full-time person, you are going to pay spousal support to the part-time person for a period of, let's say, 3 to 5 years, which will allow them to get further education or some more work experience so that they can sort of catch up to you. And then after 5 years, done. Okay? We do have situations where we have long-term marriages, and long-term marriages are determined as 10 years or more, where, let's say, one spouse actually was just a stay-at-home mom. In those kinds of cases, the court will look and say, you know what, I think we need spousal support for a longer period of time, but typically there still will be an end cap on that. Typically it'll be for 10 years or 15 years, okay, which will allow the spouse that was the stay-at-home mom to either continue raising the children until they're grown, get an education, get on with their life, because the expectation in society now is women are just as capable as men and you better get out there and work. Period. Don't expect a man to support you forever because you women told us you don't want that. Can't have it both ways. This women's movement really kind of tore apart the world. Now, if I am not going to get spousal support from my spouse, there has to be a specific part of a separation agreement or a specific acknowledgement in a decree that neither party is going to pay spousal support to the other. Why is that? Well, because typically the court does not retain jurisdiction over this issue. So if I'm a spouse and I get a divorce and I say, no, I don't want any spousal support, I can't come back later and say, I kind of changed my mind. It pretty much stinks out here in the real world, and I think I need a little bit of help. The court's going to say, sorry, you waived it. You signed this little waiver in the separation agreement. You signed off saying you don't want it. We don't retain jurisdiction over this. I'm really sorry. You got one bite of the apple and you blew it. Okay? That's a really important thing to remember, that your clients need to know when they say no to spousal support, it's a forever no. Okay? Now, can spousal support go both ways? Can a woman have to pay a man spousal support? Yep. So if my husband worked, I don't know, at a steel mill while I went on to get my master's degree in accounting, and I earn more than he does, guess what? I'm going to have to pay him spousal support. Just is. It's actually just a math equation now. It has nothing to do with traditional responsibilities within a marriage. That's why alimony is not applicable anymore, because it was based on this theory that we as a society want to keep everybody married, and there are traditional roles that are important in marriage. Those have been thrown out the window since the 1960s and 1970s, Women decided they wanted it changed, and the legislature responded. It just is. It just is. And because we're now 50 years past the 1970s, women are out in the workplace. Most people who get married have similar income. Statistically, it's been proven that, maybe two people went to law school and met each other in law school. They have similar earning capacity. Get on with it. Right? That's how that works. Okay? Now, your book talks about modifying spousal support. Doesn't really happen. Now, sometimes some states will allow a cost of living increase in spousal support. That's kind of going by the wayside too. Cost of living means as inflation goes up, your dollar is worth less. And so if I'm getting $100 a month for spousal support, in 2022, that $100 is worth 8% less because of inflation. And so some states say there's a cost of living increase in spousal support. Ohio's not one of them. Okay? Now, some people will say, look, I don't want spousal support, but I want medical insurance. And maybe husband carried the medical insurance for the family. You can work spousal support so that the husband is getting credit for the cost of carrying medical insurance for a number of years. And there are some tax benefits to that. So some people will try and work spousal support. What it really is money for health insurance, for purchasing health insurance. Okay? Some people will secure spousal support with life insurance because, let's face it, it's kind of risky business. If, let's say, I'm married to someone who's 10 years older than I am, who is in not the greatest health, and they have to pay me spousal support. If they drop dead, that spousal support ends. Period. Okay? So what can you do? What you can do is you can ask them to buy a life insurance policy so that if they die before the end of the spousal support term, let's say my ex-spouse has to pay me $500 a month for 10 years. Okay. I'm not sure he's going to make it 10 years. So maybe I will say make it $300 a month for 10 years, but carry a life insurance policy so that if you die, I'm the beneficiary and then I get money. It is a way of, sort of having an insurance policy on your own income. There's no guarantee that the ex-spouse is going to pay the premiums on that, but it's something. And typically, if you're entitled to a spousal support award, you might trade that for, say, a piece of real estate, or the house, or a car, because there's no guarantee over the next 10 years you're going to get that money. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Sometimes it's better to take a small loss, take the house, waive the spousal support, and get on with it. And that's something we're going to talk about in the next chapter when we talk about property and distribution of property. Okay? When does spousal support end? Does it ever end? Let's say that my ex-spouse is supposed to pay me over the next 10 years. But in 3 years, I fall madly in love and I get remarried. Spousal support ends. Remarriage terminates a spousal support award. So if I get remarried, my ex-spouse is going to go to court and say, she's remarried, cut this off, please. Just how it works. If I think that I'm really slick and I don't get remarried, but I move in with somebody, my ex-spouse can go and say, look, they're trying to skirt the spirit of the order by living together. It's not like she's got just a toothbrush and a pair of slippers at his house. She's completely moved in with him. Most states now say, yeah, if you're cohabitating, like really cohabitating, we are going to go ahead and terminate spousal support. And as we've also said, if the party who is responsible for paying the spousal support dies, spousal support terminates. It's not like you can go to that person's estate and say, look, there's 5 more years left on spousal support. The estate needs to pay me. It doesn't work that way. It terminates. Okay? That's why those insurance policies are a big deal. So how do we get spousal support? Is it that my ex-spouse is going to write a check to me every month? No. Kind of hearkening back to alimony, spousal support is administered through the same agency that administrates child support. The Child Support Enforcement Agency. In Ohio, it's called the Child Support Enforcement Agency. So the way it works is the obligor, the ex-spouse that is responsible for making the payment, either has money taken out of his paycheck whenever he gets paid, or makes a payment to the Child Support Enforcement Agency. It then goes to the state of Ohio, who takes a processing fee, who then sends it back to the county, who then sends it to the spouse that's supposed to receive the spousal support. There is a minimum of a 3% processing fee that is added to whatever your spousal support payment is, and that is to pay off everybody on the whole chain of how this money gets distributed. Get the government involved, they're going to want a piece of the action. So that's how that works. Okay? If it's time for me to terminate the child support, 10 years is gone, or the spousal support. If I go by 10 years and I've made all my payments, I'm not in arrears, I owe nobody nothing, I have to go back to court to terminate it. It doesn't automatically terminate. I have to go and say, 10 years, I'm out of here. The Child Support Enforcement Agency will verify that you don't have any kind of an arrearage and will stop it. Now here's the problem. That might take a little bit of time. It can take 3 months. And in the meantime, you're continuing to pay spousal support. Maybe it's coming out of your paycheck. Can you get that money back? Well, in theory you can. You can go to your small claims court and say, hey, I overpaid my spousal support. She kept it, or he kept it. Have them pay me back. The reality is, if you overpay it, you overpay it. You're kind of out of luck. Kind of out of luck. Okay? All right, that's it for this chapter on alimony, spousal support, and maintenance. You've got a discussion and some essay questions to go with this chapter, and then we'll have a test on it. I will get with you and start posting tests when you feel like you're ready to start taking tests. Okay? If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.